We started yesterday talking about the Middle Passage and what the West Africans were facing in terms of enslavement by the American settlers. And we will continue talking about the dilemmas they faced, as well as talking about life in West Africa before slavery came to the Americas. So, we are talking about the triangular trade route. And so, as you can see on the map, North America is where we live. This is the coastline that was the early settlements, the 13 original colonies, the plantation states that were built here. So, as you can see, there's a triangular trade route. They would take tobacco, cotton, sugar over to Europe. Then from Europe, the ships would take manufactured goods to Africa. They would take West Africans onto the slave ships, and then they would transport the enslaved people to North and South America, and then the cycle would continue. So, West Africa in the 1500s, I'm going to read to you chapter 8, and we're going to talk a little bit about what life was like in West Africa in the 1500s. The region known as West Africa lies on the continent of Africa, just above the equator. To the north is the Sahara Desert. To the west and south is the Atlantic Ocean. Most of West Africa is covered by grasslands or rainforest. In the 1500s, people of many cultures lived in West Africa. In many ways, the West Africans were alike. Most people farmed. Some were miners, craftspeople, or tradesmen. Caravans of camels carried gold and ivory from West Africa to countries north of the Sahara Desert. In return, West Africans received salt, cloth, and other goods. Throughout West Africa, society was based on family. Parents, grandparents, and cousins all lived in the same village. They owned the land together and shared their crops. They also worshipped the spirits of their ancestors, singing chants and dancing to ask the spirits to protect them. Another common tradition was storytelling. Fables, legends, and myths helped people learn about their culture and history. West Africans were also different in many ways. Some lived in small villages, while others lived in large cities such as Timbuktu. Some villages and cities were part of big empires. The people of West Africa spoke many languages. Often, people from different villages could not understand one another. Most West Africans in the 1500s lived in freedom, but that was about to change as more and more slave traders from Europe arrived during this century. So, this picture here also depicts what life in a West African village may have been like. Now, remember, not all West African villages were like this. This is just one example of what that might look like as small family units lived in a village together and farmed, cooked, and worked together as trade people. All right. One of the dilemmas was that the European slave trade in West Africa. When the European traders arrived, they saw that some people in West Africa were not as free as others. These people were servants or workers. Some of them had been captured during wars. Some had been found guilty of crimes. Some were even sold as slaves by the West African to Arab traders. The Europeans called all of these people slaves, but their lives were very different from the lives of slaves that we would know in North America. Many of them became part of larger families in the village. They did not all have rights that the other people in the village had, but they could own land and farm. They could become skilled workers and earn money. Most of them could gain their freedom one day through work or marriage. The European traders introduced a new kind of slavery. Europeans had started huge sugar and tobacco plantations in the Americas. They needed large numbers of workers on these plantations, and one way to get this was to own slaves. So traders came to West Africa offering cloth, rum, tobacco, and other goods in exchange for slaves. Many Africans became wealthy by trading slaves for goods like these. The Europeans also offered to trade guns for slaves. This kind of trade changed life in West Africa. A group that traded slaves for guns could begin to threaten its neighbors. Then the neighbors wanted their own guns, so they traded slaves for guns too. Soon, groups all over West Africa were exchanging slaves for guns.